Hi, I'm Rob. Decided to go ahead and put a seminar together discussing things that have come about in assistance to families that have lost those to COVID. I'm here with Marty Isaacs. Marty is our pre-need manager. Marty and I have been together for just over 20 years, and I'm going to kind of let him introduce himself and a little bit of his expertise, and then I'm going to share with you a little bit about what we've been doing at Littleton and Rue since the beginning of the pandemic.
Hi, folks. Marty Isaacs. I've been here at Littleton and Rue for about a little over 20 years, since 2001, serving as our pre-arrangement manager that entire time. I've probably met hundreds of you over that time. I also serve as a funeral director as well, and we've spent some time trying to prepare ourselves to educate those that we serve and to make you aware of some of the hurdles that maybe many of you are going to have to hurdle. We want to help you do that and not expect you to do it alone. So we're here to get that information to you to help you as best as we can educate you and prepare you for that.
That's right. So back when the pandemic began and just people were starting to, like all the stories started coming out just over a year ago. I remember that Eric and I here at the studio, we were coming on and interviewing some folks and how they were dealing with it in the different communities, talked to some other funeral directors in the community, and just how we were going to serve Springfield and serve the community the best we could during a pandemic. Since then, Littleton and Rue has gone through, just like a lot of other folks have had to change and adapt to how they can best care for themselves and care for the community as a business. And one of the things we've been doing is live streaming ever since the beginning of the pandemic. So people that were not comfortable coming to the funeral home or coming to events, even small events, we're able to see them on their phone and on the Facebook page. So that's one of the things we've been doing, and we continue to try to make our environment safe for folks. And things have loosened up a little bit. We were always kind of under the radar as far as gathering people, but we always wanted to stay cautious. Marty, I know that you went through some real difficulty with COVID, and I wonder if you could share with the folks kind of your own personal story, a little bit of what you experienced with your family with COVID.
Well, I know many of you tuning in, the purpose is because you've suffered loss directly as a result of COVID in your family. And I can tell you that we've experienced those kinds of difficulties too. I can remember sitting with my best friend in mid-June, and we were visiting down in Florida and talking about, boy, I don't know anybody from church or on Facebook. I don't know one single person that's contracted this disease. And, what do you think about that? And probably within 3 weeks, most of his family, most of my family were infected. He lost his father in August. Frankly, I almost lost my father that same time. My father was in ICU for 3 weeks, and it was touch and go. In fact, we at one juncture believed that he would not survive. He did.
I believe hospice was involved too at one point.
He went home into hospice care and had basically was sent home to die. And there were other plans in store for him. And I myself, I missed 2 months of work. I was quite sick. And we've had many of our staff there that have had the virus over the course of time. And I missed basically the months of July and August. Completely wiped me out and have recovered from that. And thankfully, there were so many people that helped my dad during that time that donated the plasma that I felt that was one of the things I needed to do. So I've been heading down to the Community Blood Center every Friday for about 3 months, donating the convalescent COVID plasma to pay it forward because somebody did that for my dad. I felt it was the least that I could do. So we've been involved, and this has affected our family personally and our funeral home family in so many ways as it's affected yours. And because it's touched us so deeply, we felt really compelled that we wanted to prepare ourselves and do what we could to get some information to help our families out there and other folks that may have need that we maybe didn't serve directly, but we want to be of assistance to everybody in the community.
Yeah. one of the things that as a funeral director, and I'm not the only one, not the only funeral home that experienced this, sitting across from families that we knew well and families that came to see us because they just didn't expect to be there at this time, but people were just not able to remember their loved one in such a way publicly. They weren't able to have celebrations. And honestly, if you're a caring professional in our business, this is bothersome, and it's concerning, because you know that in the grief process, having the community come together in connection during that loss is key for effective healing. Mm-hmm. And so many people had to close those doors during that time, and so. Like I said, we're here not to really discuss that, but I just want, I wanted Marty to share his personal story. I wanted you to hear how we've been handling this pandemic at the funeral home, and how we've perceived our families that we've been taking care of, how they've been, having to change things. I think one of the things that we did also is let's just make videos available to the community, memorial videos. So whether we were taking care of these folks or not, we just wanted them to know that they want to put together an online video. We're going to do that at no cost. We're still doing that. And it's just, and there's been other funeral homes in the community that have been doing their part. So I won't take this time I'm not going to toot our horn if I'm not willing to honk for others. And I'm just telling you that we have a great community where they've come together and embraced folks. So what we're here today for is we want you to be informed. And there was an article in the Springfield News-Sun recently. There's been some online information. I believe the health department has been putting out some information. By the way, I just want to compliment Charlie Patterson and his entire crew at the Clark County Health Department. They have been doing a fantastic job, working tirelessly since the beginning of this pandemic. And then the very, very efficient vaccine center they've set up over at the mall, the old mall. So just want to compliment you all, and you've been putting out information about this. But we're here to kind of share with folks about the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, and these are funds that are available to those that have paid for funerals since January. And we all have been through a seminar to learn about this, but Marty has a lot of information to share. We're going to kind of go back and forth as we're talking. We have several questions that we've been able to pull out. And that we're going to answer those. And I'm sure you'll have more, and I want you to be able to share on Facebook, online, and we'll answer those, maybe some of them live if they don't get answered during our time. But Marty, why don't you go ahead and begin to share some of the information you put together about FEMA and their funeral assistance plan.
And one of the things that you just alluded to, that you mentioned January. Well, it's actually going back to January 20th of 2020, that if you've experienced loss that is COVID-related, since January 20 of 2020, through concurrently, and probably pretty much through all of 2021. There has been some misinformation out there about that this bill was only for 2020, but there are dollars that have been appropriated by the government for 2021 as well too. So to try and make this as digestible as possible for you, we just kind of have a few bullet points that we want to walk through first with you. The first thing is people are asking, what is the process? How do I do this? Well, the first and most important thing is that FEMA, beginning Monday, April the 12th, this seminar that they produced this information for us a couple of weeks ago occurred, but there's going to be a call center number designated by FEMA. They have over 50,000 FEMA workers designated to handle these phone calls. So they have a large force dedicated. Now, what I'm hearing is that there are significant 5,000. I said 50,000.
That's like 50,000.
Thanks, Chief.
More. That's all right. Hey.
No wonder they're not answering the phone.
We're just being live, but there's good information. We'll make sure we get the right numbers to you, though.
And I have heard that there are some significant delays right now on the phone. Yeah. The phone number that you would call the call center opened again on Monday, April the 12th. That number, 1-844-684-6333. The hours are Monday through Friday, not on the weekend, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, what we're hearing is that there are significant delays right now, as you can imagine. The number of losses that have been, and people are filing right away because they're concerned that there's a limited amount of funds. So first of all, I'm going to circle back to that, but there are not limited funds. So we're not in a race.
We were worried about that.
So if you get frustrated, don't worry. There's not a pecking order. everyone's going to be served.
I believe the number that was allotted by Congress is $2 billion. Does that sound accurate to you? I've heard up to $2 billion has been set aside for funeral assistance.
I know that there's not a cap.
Fact check me on that, but that's still a lot.
I know that there's not a cap on it. I do know that, that if this has occurred, you're going to be taken care of. Yeah. So the process, first of all, it's by phone application only. So that's the first thing. It's a little bit different, is that the initial application has to be handled over the phone. Now, I'm going to talk to you about who makes the application and who's eligible in a few moments. But the initial application by phone only. After you do that, then you're going to be able to go on and set up an account at disaster.gov to provide the documentation and upload the forms that are needed for that communication. You can also scan those documents needed and upload your account for the quickest service, but you can also fax it. You can also send it in through the mail as well, too. But the process will be that you initiate the application by phone.
Yeah, and this is one of the areas where we're letting you know this, and then I'm saying now this is where we want to step in and help you here, and this is how we can do it. Mm-hmm. Some of you may be like, I don't know how to make a PDF. I don't know how to upload a document. Can you fax this for me? So this is at Littleton and Rue. I just want you to know that we are available to set times up for you where you can come in and get the application started. I just want you to know that any funeral home, but we do not receive these funds. And I know Marty's going to highlight that again, but we are not receiving these funds. These funds are for the individual who has incurred funeral expenses.
Correct.
So we're going to say that probably a couple more times.
Several more times.
But what I want to say is part of our aftercare for families is we are here to make sure that you can get these documents and get these funds from FEMA to you. So we'll help you upload these documents and make sure this is set up appropriately. But this has to be a personal account set up by you, and then we can help you upload those documents if you don't know how to do that or don't have a family member that could help you with that.
Absolutely. And I believe this webinar will be available on our page regularly. So as I'm giving you some information, if you miss some of it, this is going to be kept up on our page so that you can go back if you need to go back and get some information. So the question is, who's eligible? Who can do this? So number one, the death must have occurred in the United States. The death certificate must show that the death was COVID-related, either caused by COVID, possibly caused by COVID, or somehow connected to COVID. It must be mentioned. Now, if your death certificate does not say that, we do know that you can try and have that amended through the health department and the physician that signed that paperwork if you are convinced or if it was somehow inferred that it was COVID-related, but it's not on the death certificate. You will have to have that amended before you make this application because the death certificate has to say COVID-related. So
on your loved one's death certificate, that has to say COVID. I looked at a particular family we have taken care of, and I was concerned because I knew the person had died, and I thought it was COVID related, and I was concerned that wasn't listed on there. And it was actually, if you look at the bottom of a death certificate where the causes are, there's about 4 lines, I believe, and it was listed on the 3rd line that it was an effect of the death. So, like I said, like Marty was saying, it has to be mentioned. It's very important that you would understand that.
Absolutely. Now, the applicant, whoever's making application, they have to be a U.S. citizen, a non-citizen national, or a qualified alien or legal permanent resident, and you would have incurred funeral expenses after January 20th of 2020, continuing through a yet-to-be-determined specified date, so well into 2021. And again, those funds are available for 2021, not just 2020. It also applies to people who were born in or have connections to one of the American territories. The deceased did not have to be a U.S. citizen. If funeral costs were paid by check, credit card, or even life insurance, they are eligible to be reimbursed.
Okay, let's stop there because I know that I had a text last night from a family member who knew about this program. They said that they had cashed in their insurance policy to pay for the service, and they were concerned because it was, that's what they bought that insurance policy for. Can they be reimbursed?
They cashed in the insurance policy for what purposes?
Life insurance to pay the service. It's not a pre-funded.
If it's pre-funded, and again, we'll circle back to that, but if it's a prearranged funeral contract, that is not eligible. If you had life insurance that was specifically for death care expenses, what
So
we
it'd
would
say
call
funeral
final expense.
Final expense life insurance.
Right. If it's final expense life insurance, it's not reimbursable.
But a life policy,
Regular old life policy, prudential policy,
retirement
whatnot.
policy, retirement benefits.
Something from out at Harvester,
Mhm.
absolutely.
International.
Then absolutely you're eligible
Still
in
eligible.
that regard.
Thank you.
Payment is not income tax related. It's not income related. I'll come back to that again. So unlike some other relief stimulus checks, for instance, the COVID relief checks that were based upon your income levels, this is not. So it doesn't matter what your income status is, you are eligible to receive these funds. If a family member had a prepaid funeral contract and subsequently used that pre-need payment for services, they are not eligible for this. So what is the benefit? There's a maximum reimbursement of $9,000 per individual. Now, that's everything from headstone, funeral services, cemetery costs, flowers, death certificates. All that just simply has to be on an itemized statement from the funeral home or the cemetery showing that those costs were incurred. If there have been, sadly, for some of you, that you've had multiple deaths in your family and you've had to pay for multiple loved ones that you've lost during this time, FEMA will reimburse those individual claims for family members of up to $35,000 per family. So, that's multiple loved ones that you may have lost. But each of those has to be made application individual. So you don't apply for all of those on one app. They would all have to be done individually.
Individual accounts. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Now, it may be the same applicant calling in and starting a new account for somebody else, but you can do that so that those are available. Mm-hmm. So the real question and where we want to help and where we will need to help you is what all do I need for an application? Now, there's a lot of information here that I want to go over. So first of all, who can apply? The applicant must be the individual who either paid for the funeral or signed the paperwork. So if there's a spouse or if there's a guardianship, all of that is superseded by who took the financial responsibility. Yeah. Who signed the paperwork?
So in Ohio, for example, there's a next of kin order. You can find this online, but let's say that the spouse was living and they're the next of kin, but a sibling or a sibling took the responsibility of to pay the finances of the service, and this is very common because people are in dire straits. This COVID-related pandemic, people want to step up and pay the service, so they would have paid the expenses. If their signature is on the agreement, the people that paid to help you, then they would receive those funds back. But if you as the next of kin signature is on the agreement, but somebody gave you the money, let's say, then you would still be the one to be reimbursed for the funeral expenses. That's right? We got that?
Yes. And one thing I want to say about that is if somebody gave you money or assisted you, that will actually count against this process. If you've received charitable donations, if a church paid for something, if there was a collection or even a money-raising page.
Like a GoFundMe?
A GoFundMe.
So anybody, like if I, as a friend, let's say I wrote a check for, as a friend, I helped a friend. Does that mean that person's not eligible? If I'm not a nonprofit, I heard you say some nonprofits.
Right.
So if I'm just exactly. A friend giving money.
Yeah, they're not looking to that degree. They're looking, has assistance come from another organization, a church, a charitable
Salvation
organization,
Army,
exactly.
A benefit from the city, let's say, that is designated
exactly.
for. So there's a fund in the city of Springfield and other municipalities where the person is deemed indigent. There's funds available to take care of a direct cremation. The family could not be reimbursed for those expenses.
Right, and if there was a GoFundMe, which we see happen a lot, that means that there has been support financially come in, and FEMA will not provide a benefit in that setting. So we have a question.
Yeah, so the question is, the family split up the funeral-related bills among two siblings. How do we handle that? If both siblings are signed on the agreement, then would both siblings receive it back, or the signature that's at the top of the
I
agreement?
tell you what, I'm going to come back to that in a couple of points, in just a couple of points, because that's a great question, and it's actually some new information I just came across today.
Okay, so
I'm going to answer your question here in just a moment. So the applicant themselves, the person that we've already designated as the person who signed or paid, and maybe they only paid a portion, and we'll come to that here in a second. What you're going to need to initiate the application when you make the phone call is that FEMA is going to need your Social Security number, your date of birth, your email, your home address, and your contact phone number. You also have to provide your household gross income. Now, it's not income related, but for whatever reason, FEMA's still asking for that. I know that will make some people nervous. It made me question a little bit, but multiple times we've been assured that this is not income related like the COVID stimulus checks were, but they still are going to want that. You're going to have all of those items ready before you make that phone call to provide that information. Direct deposit is available. If you want that, you'll need to have the account and routing number available for direct deposit. That would be my recommendation. Because the up to a $9,000 check floating in the mail, and there's already been a lot of fraudulent attempts to try and misrepresent people in these applications.
Yeah, let's make that clear. Even if you went to the FEMA website right now, you're going to see 2 red paragraphs that talk about concerns that they're already having. And so we want to say nobody but the individual who paid for the service can get these benefits.
Yes. And
not a funeral home, not an agency. Nobody can receive these benefits. We can assist, but we're not listed as a beneficiary of these funds.
Right. And apparently the main fraud attempt that's being made right now is that some people are calling folks that they know have had loss and saying, hey, I'm authorized to assist you in this process. There is nobody authorized to do that. Only you can make application. Now, once you need documents, we're going to do everything we can to help you in that regard. So the phone application takes about 20 minutes. That's how everything is initiated. After the phone interview, FEMA will send you a request for information letter asking for all the documentation that they're going to need. Once you set up, once you have that phone interview, then you're going to need to go to FEMA to create your own disaster relief account. So again, you're going to be going to www.disasterassistance.gov. There's what you'll do is you'll go to that page. You're going to click the status button, and you'll follow the instructions to set up an account. Once you have an account set up, that account you can go back regularly to check the status of your check. But more importantly, that account is there so that you can scan and upload documents. That's the quickest way to get that to FEMA. If you're not comfortable doing that, then you can mail these documents in, and I'm going to give you that address in just a second, or you can fax them. So if you are going to scan these documents, they have to be in either a PDF or JPEG form only. They must be scanned and loaded individually. So in other words, don't take all of your documents and load them at once. They have to be scanned individually, like this is from the cemetery or this is the headstone bill. You're going to scan that document, load it, and label it as headstone, or label it as funeral services, or label it as cremation services. So those are all loaded individually, and you label them as you upload them. It will take about 72 hours for those documents to show up to your account. So if you keep checking back in and they're not there, it does take a while for those to appear. Now, you can also fax these documents to 1-855-261-3452, or you can mail them to P.O. Box 10001, Hyattsville, Maryland, 20782. No, we were just talking about the co-applicant a second ago. You may include a co-applicant. So if there has been multiple family members, and there's one family in particular that I have been working recently with, that I know that a brother and a sister that came together and took care of their sibling who passed very unexpectedly from COVID. And so that happens when we have these unexpected losses. It happens even more and more where people are having to pitch in to try and cover these type of expenses. So you may include a co-applicant in that setting. So if that person also incurred expenses from the deceased, you can include a co-applicant. they can also then be able to access that account that you've created at disasterassistance.gov, and they can provide information. They can upload these documents. For that co-applicant, you must provide their name, social security number, date of birth for all co-applicants. Now, there's not going to be multiple co-applicants, so that's if there's more than 2 family members, that's just something you'll have to work together, find out who has maybe the time to work this process, who has the computer, the technical savvy to do these kinds of things and upload documents. That would kind of be my thing. Now, one thing that Rob's alluded to, and I want him to expand on a little bit, is that they're very clear that we cannot make this application for you. Mm-hmm. It is our hands are tied to a certain degree. Now, we're going to be there to help you with the PDFs. We can scan documents for you, provide all the receipts and everything that you need, but we cannot make application for you. And I'll tell you why in just a second. But that's something that FEMA's been very adamant about. Only the person who incurred these costs.
Yeah, so the National Funeral Directors Association did a good job of putting this information out. And one of the things they encouraged funeral homes to do and funeral service providers is to reach out to folks that they know they have been cared for that have had a loss to COVID, and let them know that they can help be there for assistance. So you're hearing from us because we, on a regular, we're all the time applying for things or helping people with insurance. And this is very similar to things that we do as a funeral home to help assist families. But this is not a payment to the funeral home. This is not a payment to anybody but the individual who has incurred funeral expenses.
Mm-hmm. And they go on to say that we're not allowed to make that application. We can assist with receipts, scanning documents, but we cannot call. We cannot initiate that application. Even if we're owed money, we cannot do that, okay? Documents that you're going to have ready at that time, besides the receipts and other things that we've alluded to, we're going to have to provide a copy of a death certificate that attributes the death directly or indirectly to COVID-19 and shows that it occurred in the United States.
Now, let's take a pause there. Hang on. I think that's an interesting point. Let's say that you have had a funeral, you've incurred these expenses, and you are still in the process of finalizing payment for these services to your funeral service provider, whoever that is. You still qualify to receive this up to $9,000, these benefits. So help is on the way from the government in this. So that's something that is definitely people need to understand is the funeral bill has to be incurred, but the funeral bill or the cremation bill does not have to be paid yet, based on what they're saying they will consider and how they'll reimburse you as who have taken responsibility for funeral expenses.
That's a great point. Yeah, we don't have receipts. Now, if we have receipts, we'll provide them. Yeah. But you don't have to have proof of payment. You just have to have a goods and services contract from our or any funeral home signed by the applicant. What you're also going to need is funeral expensive documents with the applicant's name, the deceased person's name, the funeral expense amount, the funeral expense dates, proof of funds received from other resources. This is important. If there have been funds, we have to provide those. So a scenario may be that you incurred $11,000 funeral service and you were given about $5,000 in assistance. You can still apply for this, but that means that you're going to get probably about $4,000, maybe up to $6,000 of assistance there. But that money that you've received has to be shown, that proof of funds from other sources specifically used towards these funeral costs. So if you received assistance from any other source, it must be listed and it won't be duplicated by FEMA.
Let me ask this question.
Yes.
Ms. Stoltz is asking a question. So she says, my husband's father died of COVID in December. My husband paid for the funeral, and my husband passed away in January. I'm so sorry. This is what we were talking about, that the multiple people that have had the loss.
Yeah.
But my husband passed in January, and then she paid for the service for the funeral. Can she get money back for payment of her
father-in-law's service?
Her father-in-law.
Is that correct?
So your father-in-law died of COVID, then your husband died, who was responsible for am I reading that right? Responsible for the service. You should be able to get reimbursed. if the person who paid, that's actually a question. If the person who paid for the funeral is no longer living,
right. So what I would suggest in that setting is that as a surviving spouse, you will have to call in to the FEMA.
She just clarified. I'm sorry.
They both died of COVID.
Yeah. So
that's going to be two separate applications. So my first suggestion would be to make the application for your spouse first, because clearly you would have signed for that documentation, and that will be in their system. There'll be a record of that. And then while you're on the phone with that FEMA agent, let them know that your situation, that the spouse that you just registered for reimbursement of their funds prior to their dying, that they lost their father, so he's not able to make that application. But if you make application for your husband first, they're going to have his death certificate in their system, and that's going to facilitate that process, because they will be looking for some sort of documentation that the initial applicant is now also deceased. And that sadly is not an unusual situation.
No, it's not, unfortunately. But I want to say that FEMA was pretty specific on the webinar that you and I and Stacy listened to, that there is situations they're going to have to review.
Yeah.
So your reimbursement process may take longer, but they're just not saying no flat out. They just gave some guidelines, said that there's ways that they cannot fund if there's been assistance. But in this scenario, this is one of those that they're going to have to review and make it a call on, and it would make sense to me that they would fund it.
Yeah, I see all the requirements for eligibility are there. It's just a question of how do we make application. So make application for your spouse first. That'll be in the system. And then while you're on the phone with the agent at that time, share the story of, by the way, my husband that I just made this application for, he would be the applicant for his father who died a few months prior, and then my husband passed as well. So I'm assuming that as a spouse, I could be the one that makes application for my father-in-law's passing as well and his expenses. So again, the last section we want to cover is how will you be reimbursed? So if you're eligible, funds will be sent either by check or mail, or by check and mail or direct deposit. Payment will not be made to the funeral home on your behalf. Those dollars will come directly to you. And again, as we talked about, I would recommend doing the direct deposit. A, you'll get the money quicker, but B, you'll get it much more securely. If you have no outstanding cost or invoices with your funeral home or cemetery, those funds are yours. So to do with as you wish. And so
they're just reimbursing your burden.
You're absolutely.
Basically.
The question that a lot of people ask is how long will the payment take? That's to be determined. We really don't know, because the process just opened up on Monday the 12th. But the more complete details, the more information you have, you're strongly encouraged to not make that initial phone call application until you have all those details in front of you and can provide them immediately. And even if you don't have all the documents, you can have all the details that we mentioned earlier, and then you'll go online and scan and upload those documents that you need. So that's kind of open for that regard. So I don't know if we have any other questions. We have some prepared questions as well.
Yeah, we have. We've been trying to answer. There's been a couple of questions that have popped up on Facebook. We do have some prepared questions. One of them I'm going to skip because we've talked over and over again.
Yeah, some of these we may have covered.
Funeral homes are not eligible, but there were several questions that were asked, and so we're just going to kind of read those and answer those.
Yeah.
And like I said, this may spur on some other questions, but
so one question from the seminar that Rob and I attended here a couple weeks ago: do people need to show proof that the contract was paid? And again, we kind of alluded to that. FEMA will accept a funeral home contract as a legal document showing that the applicant incurred the expenses. So again, it doesn't have to be paid.
Yeah, go ahead to number 3.
Okay. Are potential recipients of the FEMA financial aid subject to income caps? Do they need to qualify for other financial assistance programs previously before being considered for the FEMA program? The simple answer to that is no. It's not income dependent. It's not income based. Now, if you did receive assistance, you have to declare that. That's one thing they've been very consistent about. FEMA will ask income-related questions during the application, but it's only for demographic purposes, but you have to be able to provide that household income. Okay?
That's good. And this goes, I know funds go to the applicant. Can a funeral home serve as a co-applicant? Again, no. The funeral home cannot serve as a co-applicant. Only the funds are going to the individual who incurred the cost.
So another question: if they have cemetery and funeral contracts, is that $9,000 per person or $9,000 per contract? So it's a total of $9,000. In other words, if you incurred $9,000 of bills at the cemetery with a headstone and vault and all those types of things, and then an additional large amount of money from the funeral home, it's a grand total of $9,000 that they will reimburse, regardless of how much you may have spent on services.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Next question that we received from before: if a funeral service was prearranged and prepaid, will the funeral expenses still be covered for at-need COVID-related death?
This is important.
So again, if you had prearranged your service, and there were mixed feelings about this, honestly, on the seminar. A lot of us professionals, so the people who actually were a little bit more prepared and had planned in advance to take this burden off of their family, they're not eligible. And we felt some frustration about that. There was general frustration. If it was prearranged and prepaid, they're not eligible because they had purchased a contract strictly for their funeral services. So in that setting, they would not be able to be reimbursed if they had pre-planned their funeral and paid for it in advance.
And FEMA, I remember the FEMA representative said if there was any kind of pre-death payment planning with the cemetery, graves purchased, opening, closing purchase, vaults purchased with the funeral home, casket, vault, any services that were pre-purchased for the specific, need, obviously for the death, you cannot be reimbursed for those.
You may have bought your headstone 5 years ago and had it placed. We can't get reimbursement for that. Also, somebody asked, in addition to that, does a pre-need trust count against the family? So again, if the family has established some sort of trust to pay for funeral expenses specifically, that again is not available and that is not eligible. It's considered a duplication of benefits, and FEMA will not cover that.
So a question was that they've seen that the potential reimbursement is only through December 31, 2020. What is the provision for deaths in 21? FEMA received additional legislation that covers deaths for 2021 as well as 2020.
Next question that was asked: if the application is taken over the phone, how does FEMA receive all the documents? The best way, again, is to set up that account that we mentioned before at disasterassistance.gov. To upload those, again, we can help you with that. We can scan all these documents. We can put them in PDF form. We can email those to you, or whatever we need to do to help you in that process, we are going to absolutely do to help you in that regard.
When people sit and make arrangements, the concern is how many death certificates will I need to take care of, my loved one's affairs? Do I need a certified copy? Do I need a photocopy? One of the questions was, can a photocopy be uploaded and sent in? Yes, the answer is that you can use a photocopy of the death certificate. It does not need to be a certified copy, meaning the original copy. So when you upload and scan that in, it's going to be a photocopy anyway, but that's just something that we want to make sure that you understand, is that it can be a photocopy.
Absolutely.
Another question was, if a family opted for no services at the time of death, can they now have a service and receive FEMA funds? That's a good question, because there were many families like, we can't do anything. We're just not going to do anything. We're going to have an immediate burial. We're not going to have a viewing. We're going to just have a direct cremation instead of having a memorial service that we wanted to have.
There was a period of time when we weren't allowed to do anything
there was a short time that, like I said, in the beginning, that funeral homes kind of flew under the radar as far as, kind of needed gatherings. But then there was a tightened down time that you really couldn't do it when the spread was when the peak was increasing. So, the answer actually is that you can.
You absolutely, if you didn't do anything but you wanted to have some sort of memorial celebration, you can absolutely do that. And if your original expenses were below that $9,000 cap that FEMA has set, you can indeed go ahead and schedule those type of memorial services at your funeral home of choice. And what's neat about that is, if that's something that you want to do after the fact, a year later or whatnot, or at a special time in the life of your family, or something that's more convenient down the road, You don't technically have to pay for those services. We just will provide you the invoice, and then that can be submitted. So if you're anticipating that you might have a memorial service down the road or something of that effect, then I would tell you to not make application because we want to include all costs that are incurred at one time. Yeah. So, and if you want to schedule a memorial service in the summer, we could invoice all of that now and put that together for you as an expense.
Any funeral home provider can.
Yes.
Yeah. And another thing is that people are like, I'd like to buy a marker or something for my loved one, but I couldn't do it at the time. This is a part of that. Just remember that things that you wanted to do that you were not able to do, this assistance goes towards the reimbursement of those expenses up to $9,000, so you can do what you wanted to do at that level.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'll jump to the question 13 that we've had before. Will the funds run out? Again, through both the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 as well as the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2021, that there are dollars available not just for 2020 but for 2021, and there is not a cap. There is going to be money. The money's there until the applications stop.
I just had a question that said, so if they had specific services pre-funded, like a direct cremation, and now they want to have a memorial service, can they incur those costs? Somebody asked that. Or an urn, or let's say they couldn't get an urn at the time, now they want to get an urn. Are all those, even though, what if they pre-funded simple cremation and then they actually want to do different, is that possible?
Yes, it is, because that pre-funded contract would have been just for direct cremation. So now if you wanted to add some cremation jewelry or an urn or do a memorial service, that's different expenses beyond what you had pre-funded. You can do those things. Again, just know that there's a $9,000 cap on that. So I interpret that to mean that if you have $3,000 prearranged services, that's going to count towards that cap. So you're going to be, you want to be under, I'm thinking at least that $6,000 mark, that you don't want to supersede the $9,000. But whatever new expenses that you had not prearranged before that are new expenses, those are eligible as COVID-related benefits.
That's good.
So that's a really good question. So
can a person apply and purchase? Can a person apply and purchase a niche for cremated remains now that when the person died in 2020, saying that they have the remains at home without any funds to purchase the niche or garden space? The answer would be to that question, yes. Yeah. They now have the opportunity to purchase a niche or in their urn garden, as long as a death was incurred after January 20 of 2020. And the individual may be eligible to receive funds for reimbursement for those expenses.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
that's allowable.
Another question was, do you have any information that the funeral home and crematory providers hand out to families inquiring, such as a contact card, flyer brochures, things like that? We don't have anything printed, or FEMA is working on a flyer that would be from the government. A funeral home, we did not produce anything. This is what we're doing to make sure that you know it. We actually did send a letter to our families to make sure that they knew about this benefit and that we would be doing this seminar. So it's important to know. But as far as a flyer or anything, we don't have that. But FEMA also is available to assist families, I think in Spanish and also hearing impaired. Those are also opportunities that FEMA makes available, so to make sure everybody who is eligible for benefits can understand what their benefits are from the government.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. 17.
Next question is, how does the $35,000 work? Does it mean that an individual cumulative FEMA benefit is the limit to this amount no matter how many family members that they lose?
So let's go say, where did the $35,000 number come from again?
Right. So $35,000 is a cap on a family that's had loss. So we had a question earlier today that that the husband was the applicant for his father who had passed, and then sadly the husband passed months afterwards. So that would be a perfect example that that family would be, and those two are each still judged on a $9,000 per reimbursement basis. But if there were multiple other families, so that's $18,000. So if we were ever in a setting where you had more than 4 deaths in a family, that would essentially supersede $9,000 apiece at $36,000, that there is a cap of benefits being provided to a family that's had multiple losses of $35,000 on that.
Yep.
So another quick question: the funeral bill, and this is a question that we're going to get. I think continue to get. If the funeral bill was paid by life insurance, can they be reimbursed? And this is important because it's not a prearranged contract. That life insurance was not specifically earmarked for funeral services. So if the funeral bill was paid by life insurance, what it does go on to say is that FEMA cannot duplicate the benefit, and FEMA would not be able to reimburse the applicant if expenses were incurred. So even if that life insurance policy, and I feel like that this probably sounds like a little bit contradictory maybe to what we had shared earlier, but I want to review the question again. So again, if the funeral bill was paid for by life insurance, can they still be reimbursed? So again, what our understanding from the FEMA seminar, and this is something that I think would be worth investigating with that phone call with FEMA, is that if it was paid, can they be reimbursed? So again, one of the FEMA representatives that answered this question on the live seminar said if the funeral bill was paid by life insurance, then FEMA cannot duplicate that benefit. So they would consider that as set-aside funds earmarked for funeral services, even if it wasn't a prearranged plan. And they would not be able to reimburse the applicant for expenses incurred. So if you use life insurance...
We just were talking about that.
Yeah.
So what we said earlier was not accurate.
That's what I alluded to, is that we had kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but this is a more specific question.
So
there.
So if you've used life insurance, this is one of the specific questions I had last night, and that specifically, if they have used life insurance, then they can't qualify to receive benefits.
According to this Q&A from FEMA from 2 weeks ago, that is the answer. That they would consider that a duplicate benefit. So again, my counsel in that setting would be to call FEMA, gather the documentation, make the phone call, and simply make the case that, yes, we paid for it with life insurance, but what's the difference between writing a check out of my checking account for $9,000 or taking life insurance, depositing my account, and writing a check for $9,000? So, that's a question.
Inconsistent with what they told us.
It's a little inconsistent. That's the one thing I've seen that because somewhere else we saw kind of a different inflection of answer on that. So my counsel there would be to definitely make the application.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Somebody also asked, I see that a pre-need contract is not eligible, but there are often expenses that exceed the pre-need, and I think we just talked about this. So additional expenses greater than those covered by pre-arrangement, will they be covered by FEMA? And again, we kind of alluded to that a moment ago. Yes, any additional expenses beyond the pre-arrangements will be covered by FEMA.
Okay.
So last question.
Can a funeral home employee or assistant applicant who may be elderly, hard of hearing, or handicapped by speakerphone when they are ready to call in to start the application process? Also, can we as funeral service providers assist the elderly in uploading the documentation to the website? FEMA has a process. This is the answer. FEMA has a process that allows for an applicant to have third party act on their behalf. The applicant will need to authorize the individual to assist. So if your funeral service provider is actually on the phone with you, then you'll need to authorize that transaction. And then the other question is, are we required to contact the families prior or current to inform them that the assistance will be available? And that's one thing that we're doing now. We're not required to, but we want to make sure that we did take the opportunity to make sure you knew about this benefit. So when we weren't required to, a funeral service provider is not required to let you know. The public is, the newspaper did a pretty good job. The health department's doing a good job. And then we want to make sure that the families we've taken care of have this information at hand.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's been a few questions. Like you said, I think one of the things that seems to be we need to make sure that you understand is that it sounds like there has been a little bit of a fluid answer with the if you have life insurance and then you use part of that to pay for the service.
There's a little ambiguity there.
Yeah, a little bit of ambiguity because we were told one thing and then the question was answered differently. We want you to still go ahead and make application and hear from
Absolutely
FEMA
apply.
directly. You need to, we're just relaying information that's been told, and unfortunately, a lot of these, the stimulus packages, everything has been fluid the whole
Yeah.
year. That's probably the name for the entire year, not to mention just very
all
difficult. But
unprecedented.
yeah, it's all unprecedented. So I'd say if there's enough people making case, the government's going to have to make an answer for that. And if they already have, you'll hear it from them. So we're saying if you've used life insurance, still apply.
Absolutely.
But if you have pre-funded funeral insurance, that will not apply. So I think that's all the information. We've answered as many questions. We're going to make sure that this stays available to you. This is always going to be in our Facebook page. We'll refer to it. Marty, I want to thank you for taking the time to not only do your job so well, but to make sure that you had the right information and just with such excellence. I appreciate your professionalism in taking care of this
Absolutely.
and getting this information.
And we want to encourage you folks again. So the next step in the process is that phone call. And then as you need us, we're looking for your phone calls to provide you the documentation that you need. If you need to call the cemetery, do that. They'll provide that documentation. But we're looking forward to serving you at that next level after your application's been made to help you with the documentation in every way that we possibly can.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being on here, the few that were, and then we'll make sure this information continues to go out. We're here to take care of you. I want to say our phone number, 937-323-6439 is the funeral home number. If you have questions, call that directly. Or you can email me at robrue@littletonandrue.com, all spelled out. Same with Marty. Marty at littletonandrue.com, and we will make sure that you have the right information. Thank you. Thanks for being here with us this afternoon.